The trunk was not heavy. That was the first thing Mrs. Colbert noticed when the girl arrived at the rear entrance of Ashmore Hall. Not her face, not her dress, not the quiet way she stood in the October rain without moving closer to the door to avoid getting wet. It was the trunk. One small wooden trunk, banded in old leather, small enough that the girl had carried it herself from the lane without asking anyone for help. Mrs. Colbert had been housekeeper at Ashmore Hall for 22 years. She had seen new staff arrive with mountains of luggage and leave with nothing. She had seen girls arrive with nothing and leave changed in ways she could not explain. This one had one trunk. She carried it herself. And she was not wet exactly, but she was not dry either, and she did not seem to care about either condition. "You are the new housemaid," Mrs. Colbert said. It was not a question. She said it the way she said most things, like a statement that expected agreement. "Yes, ma'am," the girl said. "Amara Solis." Mrs. Colbert looked at the name on her paper. It matched. She looked back at the girl. Amara Solis was 23 years old, though she looked both younger and older than that at the same time, which was a thing Mrs. Colbert could not explain and therefore did not like. She had dark eyes that moved carefully around a room, the way a person's eyes move when they are mapping something they intend to remember. Her dress was plain and clean. Her hands, Mrs. Colbert noticed, were not the hands of a girl who had never worked. There were small marks on the right index finger, the kind left by years of holding a pen. "Your references are in order," Mrs. Colbert said, folding the paper and putting it into her apron pocket. "You will be on the East Corridor. You will rise at 5. You will be in the kitchen no later than 5:30. You will not speak to family members unless directly spoken to. You will not enter the library without permission. You will not enter the study under any circumstances. You are here to clean, to carry, and to be invisible. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Amara said. "Good." Mrs. Colbert turned and walked inside. She paused at the door without looking back. "Bring your trunk yourself. The footmen have better things to do." Amara already had it. The East Corridor was not the worst corridor in Ashmore Hall, but it was close. It was long and narrow and cold in a particular way that suggested the cold had decided to live there permanently and had no plans to leave. The floors were old stone, the kind that held the chill from autumn straight through to April. The single window at the far end faced north, which meant it received approximately no direct sunlight at any point in the day, which meant the corridor existed in a state of permanent gray. The room assigned to Amara was at the very end. It was small. It held a bed, a chair, a table, and a hook on the wall for her coat. There was a candle on the table and a box of matches beside it. There was no rug. The window was small and north-facing and looked out at the kitchen garden, which in October was mostly bare earth and the skeletons of old cabbages. Amara set her trunk down at the foot of the bed. She sat on the mattress and tested it. It was firm. She had slept on worse. She opened the trunk and took out 3 things: a folded blanket, a small stack of books wrapped in cloth, and a leather satchel. She put the blanket on the bed. She put the books on the table beside the candle. She kept the satchel near the head of the bed. She did not unpack anything else. She sat for a moment in the cold, quiet room and looked at the ceiling. Then she stood up, smoothed her dress, and went to find the kitchen. The kitchen of Ashmore Hall was large enough to cook for 40 and was generally required to cook for 12. It smelled of bread and wood smoke and the particular fat used to season the iron pans, and it was the only room in the house's lower regions that was actually warm. 4 women were working when Amara arrived. One of them looked up. "New girl," she said. "Yes," Amara said. "Amara." "Clara," said the one who had spoken. She was broad-shouldered and quick-handed, somewhere in her mid-30s, with flour on her left cheek that she either did not know about or had chosen to ignore. She nodded toward the others in turn. "That's Nell. That's Bess. That one in the corner is Dot, and she won't talk to you until she decides she likes you, which takes about 3 weeks, so don't take it personally." Dot did not look up from the pot she was stirring. "Sit down," Clara said, already turning back to her work. "Supper in an hour. Mrs. Colbert will give you your duties in the morning." Amara sat at the long wooden table and folded her hands in her lap. She watched. This was what she did in new places. She watched and listened and learned the shape of the place before she tried to fit herself into it. She watched how Clara moved fast, efficient, with the easy authority of someone who had been in this kitchen long enough that the kitchen had shaped itself around her. She watched Nell, younger, quieter, who kept stealing small glances at Amara with open curiosity but no unfriendliness. She watched Bess, who hummed to herself as she worked, low and tuneless. She watched Dot, who did not look up once. An hour later, a young man appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had the look of a footman, tall, neatly dressed, with the careful posture of someone who had been corrected about their posture many times. He was perhaps 25. "His Grace arrives tomorrow," he announced. The kitchen absorbed this information in various ways. Clara nodded without slowing her work. Nell looked briefly alarmed. Bess stopped humming and then started again after 2 seconds. Dot said, without looking up, "I know." The footman noticed Amara. "You're the new one," he said. "Yes," she said, "Amara Solis." "Owen," he said. He looked at her in the open, uncomplicated way that people look at strangers they have not yet formed an opinion about. "East Corridor." "Yes." "Cold," he said. "I noticed," she said. He almost smiled. He went away. Clara set a bowl of soup in front of Amara without ceremony. "Eat," she said. "Morning comes early here." Amara ate. The soup was good. Simple, but made by someone who understood that simple, done correctly, was enough. She finished the bowl and brought it to the washing basin herself. Clara looked at her when she did this. Not with approval exactly. More with the recalibration that happens when a person does something small that shifts where you had initially placed them in your mind. "Bed at 9, Clara said. "Mrs. Colbert does not like finding maids awake after 9. "Thank you," Amara said. She meant it. She went back to the East Corridor. She lit the candle. She unwrapped one of the books from the cloth, opened it, and read for 1 hour. The book was in German. It was a collection of letters written by a diplomat in the previous century, and it was extremely technical in its language, and she was on her 4th reading of it. She put the book away. She blew out the candle. She lay in the dark in the cold room and listened to the house around her. The way old houses speak at night in clicks and sighs. The way wind finds its way through gaps that were never properly sealed. The way a house as large as this one holds the day's activity in its walls for hours after everything has gone quiet. She thought about what she knew of Ashmore Hall, which was more than Mrs. Colbert would have suspected, and more than she intended to reveal. She thought about the man who owned it. She thought about the East Corridor, and the cold, and the north-facing window, and the old cabbages in the kitchen garden. She thought this will do. Then she slept. In the morning, Mrs. Colbert walked her through her duties with the brisk thoroughness of a woman who had explained things many times and expected them to be absorbed the first time. The East Corridor was Amara's. 6 rooms, 3 occupied by guest quarters that were currently empty, 1 used for storage, 1 that held a wardrobe too large to move anywhere else, and 1 that opened onto a small sitting room where the governess, a thin woman named Miss Pratt, spent her evenings reading. Amara was also responsible for 2 of the main hall's ground floor rooms when the regular girl, Nell, was helping upstairs. She was responsible for bringing coal to the East Wing fireplaces by 7 in the morning. She was responsible for the East Corridor linens. She was responsible for whatever else Mrs. Colbert decided she was responsible for, which could be communicated at any time and with very little notice. "You will find," Mrs. Colbert said, stopping at the end of the corridor, "that Ashmore Hall is a house that requires a great deal of order. His Grace is a man who values order. His mother, the Dowager, values it even more. You are not here to have opinions. You are not here to be noticed. You are here to keep this corridor exactly as it is at all times and to cause no difficulty whatsoever. Yes, ma'am, Amara said. Mrs. Colbert looked at her for a moment in a way that suggested she had expected some kind of reaction and was slightly unsettled by not receiving one. Then she walked away. Amara began with the coal. By 7:15, every fireplace on the east corridor was lit. By 8, the rooms were dusted and the floors swept. By 9, she had stripped the linens from the guest room nearest the sitting room, which had last been used 2 weeks ago by a cousin whose name she had learned from Nell, taken them to the laundry, and returned to find Mrs. Colbert already moving on to some other concern. She passed through the main hall once briefly, carrying a coal scuttle. The main hall of Ashmore Hall was high-ceilinged and wide, with dark wood panels on the lower walls and oil paintings on the upper ones. The paintings were mostly landscapes and horses, with 2 portraits, one of a man from the previous century who had a very serious expression, and one of a woman in a blue dress who looked like she found the whole business of being painted mildly inconvenient. Amara looked at the portraits as she passed. The woman in the blue dress had the kind of face that held something back. Amara recognized this. It was a face that knew more than it was saying and had made a decision to keep knowing it quietly. She kept walking. In the afternoon, she was in the east corridor on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floor near the storage room when she heard footsteps coming from the direction of the main hall. They were not hurried footsteps, and they were not the footsteps of any of the regular staff, too measured for that, too even. She did not look up immediately. She kept scrubbing. The footsteps stopped. She looked up. A man was standing at the entrance to the east corridor looking at a piece of paper in his hand, and then at the door numbers, and then at the piece of paper again, with the particular focus of someone who is looking for something and is prepared to be annoyed if they do not find it. He was tall, plainly dressed for the house, a dark coat, no decoration, and he had the look of someone who had traveled recently and had not yet fully arrived. There was still something of movement about him, the way people carry distance in their posture even after they have stood still. He was not looking at her. She was on her hands and knees on the floor of the east corridor. Most people in her position would have immediately straightened, stepped aside, said something apologetic. She did none of these things. She went on scrubbing, not defiantly, simply practically. The floor needed to be scrubbed. She was scrubbing it. He looked up from the piece of paper and noticed her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Most of the people Amara had encountered in houses like this, and she had encountered several, in several countries, in arrangements as various as the houses themselves, looked at staff the way they looked at furniture, with the awareness that it existed, but without the engagement that suggested they thought it had any particular inner life. This man looked at her the way someone looks at a detail they did not expect to find interesting. It lasted 1 second. Then he said, "Do you know which of these rooms is used for storage?" "The second on the left," she said. He nodded, found it, opened the door, looked inside at whatever he needed to look at, closed the door again, and walked back the way he had come. She went back to scrubbing. She did not know with certainty, in that moment, that it was the Duke. She was fairly certain. Owen confirmed it at supper that evening when he mentioned that His Grace had arrived that afternoon and had gone directly to find some document that had apparently been misfiled in the storage room, and he had spent 20 minutes looking for it. "Found it?" Clara asked. "Eventually," Owen said. "He was in a better mood after." "He's generally in a better mood than the county makes him out to be," Nell said. "The county doesn't know him," Clara said. "The county knows what it's told." Dot, without looking up, said, "He keeps his own counsel." Everyone at the table received this observation as the settled truth it apparently was. Amara ate her supper and said nothing. That night she read for 2 hours instead of 1. The book was still German, still the letters of the diplomat, but she had moved to a section she found particularly interesting. A series of exchanges with an official from a court she was familiar with, on a subject she was familiar with, written by a man who was politically capable but linguistically overconfident in ways that had cost him, she knew, considerably more than he had probably understood at the time. She folded the cloth back around the book. She blew out the candle. The house ticked and sighed. The north-facing window let in the specific cold of a clear autumn night. From somewhere on the floor above, she could hear very faint footsteps moving back and forth, the kind a person makes when they are thinking something through while standing. She lay in the dark. She thought this will do for now. She thought tomorrow the coal at 7. She thought the floor near the storage room is still not right. It needs one more pass with the brush. She closed her eyes. Outside, the grounds of Ashmore Hall were wide and quiet under the October stars. The long drive that led from the iron gate to the front entrance ran straight through fields that had been trimmed back for winter. The house sat solid and gray at the end of it, its windows lit in some rooms and dark in others, one light on the upper floor moving briefly across the glass before going still. Inside, on the east corridor, in the room at the very end with no rug and a north-facing window, Amara Solis slept with her trunk unpacked only as far as a folded blanket and a small stack of books. In the morning, the Duke of Ashmore did not sleep well in his own house. This was not a new problem. It had started 3 years ago, around the time he had taken his first diplomatic posting to Vienna, and it had followed him home like a stray dog that had decided he was responsible for it. He would lie down at a reasonable hour, and his mind would simply refuse to cooperate. It would begin sorting through the day's correspondence, cross-referencing it with older correspondence, running calculations about things that could wait until morning, but had apparently decided they could not. Callum Ashmore was 31 years old. He had dark hair that he kept short out of practicality rather than fashion. He had the kind of build that suggested he had once done more physical work than his current life required of him, and the kind of eyes that his mother said were too serious for a man who did not yet have anything truly serious to be serious about. His mother said a great many things. He had learned, over the course of 3 decades, how to receive them with courtesy and proceed in whatever direction he had already decided to proceed in. He was at his desk at 6:30 in the morning when Mrs. Colbert knocked. "The morning correspondence, Your Grace," she said, setting the tray on the corner of the desk. "Thank you, Mrs. Colbert." She paused at the door the way she always paused when she had something to say that she was organizing into the right shape. He had known this pause for 22 years. He waited for it. "The new housemaid began yesterday," she said. "The girl on the east corridor." "Yes," he said, "I saw her." Mrs. Colbert received this information without expression. "Her references were very good," she said. "I wanted to check them myself. They were genuine." He looked up from the letter he had just opened. "Is there a reason you expected them not to be?" Mrs. Colbert considered this. "No, Your Grace," she said. "I simply check." He nodded. She left. He went back to the letter. It was from his contact in Paris, a man named Gerald Fletcher who worked in the office of the British Trade Commissioner, and who wrote letters the way a person talks when they have too much to say and not enough time to organize it, in long, winding sentences that buried the important detail somewhere in the middle where you had to go looking for it. Callum had learned to start from the 3rd paragraph. Third paragraph. There was a dispute arising over a shipping contract between a French merchant company and a British firm. The dispute involved a clause that had been drafted originally in both French and English, and the 2 versions had, it now appeared, been translated with a subtle difference that each side was now treating as the legally binding interpretation of their choice. The French side had the more technically accurate reading of the French. The British side had the more commercially favorable reading of the English. Fletcher wanted to know if Callum had any contacts who could provide an independent assessment of the French text. Callum set the letter down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He had contacts. He had a great many contacts. Very few of them were both reliable and sufficiently fluent in French legal language to be trusted with an assessment that would hold up to scrutiny from both sides. His secretary, Hargreaves, was the most likely candidate, but Hargreaves was currently in bed with influenza of the stubborn variety and had been for 6 days. He would write to Fletcher. He would tell him to send the French text. He would find someone. He went back to the morning's correspondence. There were 4 more letters. One from his solicitor about a land matter in the North Field that had been in negotiation for 7 months. One from a lord in the neighboring county about a shooting invitation. One from his mother, who lived in the dower house at the edge of the property, and communicated with him primarily by letter, despite the fact that she could walk to the main house in 8 minutes, asking whether he had thought further about Lady Vivienne Colton. And one from an associate in Vienna, written in German, about an ongoing trade arrangement that was going well. He answered the solicitor. He declined the shooting invitation politely. He set his mother's letter aside, which was what he did with his mother's letters when he needed time to think about how to answer them. He answered the Vienna letter in German because it was faster and because his associate preferred it. It was 8 in the morning. He ate breakfast in the small dining room off the study rather than the main dining room, which he only used when there were guests. He ate alone, reading through a memorandum he had brought back from Vienna that he still had not fully processed. The memorandum was 60 pages long. He was on page 37. At 9, Owen appeared with a second round of post that had come on the early cart. 2 letters. One was from his cousin about a family matter. One was from a man named Felix Hartley, who was a solicitor in London and who dealt with the more complex international side of the Ashmore estate's finances, and it was written with a controlled urgency that Callum recognized as meaning something had gone wrong. He read it twice. Felix Hartley had been working with a trading company in which the Ashmore estate had a significant interest. The trading company had entered into an agreement with a Portuguese shipping firm. The agreement had been drafted in English. The Portuguese firm was now claiming that a specific clause, which in the English version appeared to grant them a right of first refusal on certain cargo routes, had been conveyed to them verbally during negotiations in a way that implied a much broader interpretation. The Portuguese firm's position was detailed in a letter attached to Hartley's, written in Portuguese. Callum could read Portuguese well enough to get the general shape of things. He could not read it well enough to be certain he was reading the clause correctly, and in a matter where the financial exposure was the number Hartley had written in the bottom corner of his letter, he did not want to be approximately certain. He wanted to be completely certain. He put the letter down on his desk. Hargreaves was ill. The county solicitor handled local property matters and did not read Portuguese. Fletcher in Paris was asking for French help and couldn't provide Portuguese help in return. He went through his address book in his mind methodically, the way he went through most problems, which was to say without hurrying and without stopping until he had reached the end. He had no one immediately useful for Portuguese. He thought about writing to London. He thought about the 3 to 4 days that would cost on each end of the exchange. He thought about the number in the bottom corner of Hartley's letter. He stood up from his desk and walked to the window. The grounds were still and gray under a low sky. The kitchen garden was visible from this window, a long rectangular space of bare November earth. A figure was moving along the path that ran between the kitchen garden and the east wing. She was carrying a coal scuttle, walking at a steady pace, not hurrying. Even from this distance and with his mind on Portuguese shipping disputes, he noticed the particular quality of her movement. Most people, on a cold morning with a heavy scuttle, move with the awareness of their burden. They lean, they compensate, they telegraph the weight. This girl moved as if the scuttle was simply a fact she had incorporated and was no longer thinking about. He watched her until she turned the corner of the east wing and was gone. Then he went back to his desk. He did not think about her again until after lunch, and when he did it was not for any reason he could have fully explained. He had been reading through another memorandum and had come across a phrase in the text that required him to look something up in the study's reference library. And while he was looking, he had passed the shelf of language dictionaries, and something about them, the row of spines, French, German, Italian, Greek, had taken him sideways to the brief encounter in the East Corridor. She had answered him simply and directly. Most new staff did not answer him simply and directly. They said things like, "I believe it may be, Your Grace," and "I am not entirely certain," but because they were nervous, and because they were new, and because it was generally understood that if you gave a definite answer to the owner of the house, and the answer turned out to be slightly wrong, this was worse than giving a careful and hedged answer that turned out to be approximately right. This girl had said the second on the left without hesitation or qualification, and she had been correct, and she had not said it with the particular careful neutrality of someone who was performing correctness. She had said it the way a person says a thing they simply know. He took his dictionary from the shelf. He looked up what he had needed to look up. He went back to his desk. At 4 in the afternoon, he was walking through the house to stretch his legs, a habit he had maintained since Vienna, where sitting still for very long had not been an option. When he came around the corner of the lower gallery and found Owen moving quickly in the opposite direction with a look on his face that meant something had happened, and he was in the process of dealing with it. "Your Grace," Owen said, stopping. "What is it?" "The letter from Mr. Hartley. A follow-up has come. He needs a response by Thursday. He says the Portuguese firm is moving on their claim." "I know," Callum said. "I need someone who can read the Portuguese text accurately." Owen looked at him. Owen was a sensible young man who did not offer solutions he was not prepared to stand behind. So when he hesitated now, it was the hesitation of a person who had something to say and was deciding whether to say it. "What?" Callum said. "It is perhaps not a usual suggestion," Owen said carefully. "Make it anyway." "The new housemaid," Owen said, "on the East Corridor. I overheard her this morning. She was in the kitchen while I was there for the coals, and Mrs. Colbert asked her something about a reference letter she'd received, asking about its origin. The girl told her it was written by a diplomat who had been posted to Lisbon. She said she had worked for him as a translator." Owen paused. She said it in passing, as if it was not particularly remarkable. Callum was quiet for a moment. "A housemaid," he said, not skeptically, simply checking the words against each other. "Yes, Your Grace," Owen said, "though I thought perhaps, given the circumstances." Callum thought about the number in the bottom corner of Hartley's letter. He thought about Thursday. He thought about the phrase, the second on the left, delivered without hesitation. "Find her," he said. Owen found her in the East Corridor, which was, to no one's particular surprise, where she generally was. He explained, carefully, that His Grace had a request. He explained that the request was unusual. He explained that she was not obligated, but that there was a matter of correspondence that required reading and that her name had come up. He did not explain how her name had come up. She set down the cloth she was holding. She looked at him with the calm, measuring look he had noticed she applied to most things. "What kind of correspondence?" she said. "Portuguese," he said. "A legal matter." She nodded once. "All right," she said. She said it the way she said most things, without decorating it, without adding relief or surprise or the particular brightness of someone glad to be noticed. She said it as a simple agreement to a simple request, which was precisely what it was. Owen led her to the study. The Duke was at his desk. He looked up when they entered. Owen withdrew and closed the door, which was the most discreet thing he could have done, and he knew it. Callum stood up. This was automatic. It was how he had been raised, to stand when someone entered a room. He had done it in 100 rooms with 100 people who ranged from important ambassadors to the woman who brought his afternoon tea. He did it without thinking and without meaning anything by it. She noticed. He saw her notice. She absorbed it the same way she absorbed everything, which was to say she added it to whatever calculation she was running internally and showed no outward sign of what the calculation had produced. "Mrs. Solis," he said. "Miss," she said, "Miss Solis." "Miss Solis," he corrected. "I have a letter in Portuguese that requires an accurate reading. My secretary is ill. I have been told you may be able to assist." "I can read Portuguese," she said. "Is it a formal document?" "A legal contract," he said, "or more precisely, a specific clause in one." She nodded. He handed her the Portuguese letter that had come with Hartley's. She held it at a natural reading distance and read it. He watched her read it. Her eyes moved with the steady, systematic pace of a person who is reading for meaning and not for speed, not slow, but not rushing through the way people rush through things they are only partially understanding. She turned the page. She read the second page. She went back to the first page and read one section again. She looked up. "The clause in question," she said, "is in the third paragraph of the second page. In Portuguese, the word used, precondição, has two possible meanings depending on the surrounding phrasing. In a commercial contract, it usually means a precondition that must be satisfied before any right can be exercised. In this paragraph, the surrounding phrasing is ambiguous enough that it could also be read as a standing right that is subject to a precondition, which is almost the reverse." He was very still. "Their claim," she continued, "is based on the second reading. The first reading would support your position. The ambiguity is genuine, however." She looked at the letter again for one moment. "The contract was drafted in English and the Portuguese is a translation. If the English version uses a specific preposition, subject to, rather than conditional upon, then the English reading controls and their argument weakens considerably." He looked at her. She looked back at him. He said, "It says conditional upon." A brief pause. "Then the argument is stronger than it would be," she said, "but it is still not settled. The ambiguity in the Portuguese gives them space to work." He sat down. He picked up Hartley's letter. He read the section again that he had been reading all day. "Can you write up what you've just told me?" he said. "In plain language, 2 or 3 paragraphs." She looked at him with an expression that was very controlled and very polite, and said, in exactly the same measured tone she had used for everything else, "I am a housemaid, Your Grace." "I am aware of that," he said. "I am asking you to write 2 paragraphs." A pause. "Is there paper?" she said. He pushed the writing materials toward her side of the desk. She sat down in the chair across from him and wrote 2 paragraphs. She wrote them in the time it would take most people to read them. She pushed the paper back across the desk. He read it. It was exactly what he needed. Clear, precise, free of excess language, organized in the way a legal analysis should be organized, which was to say with the conclusion first and the reasoning behind it. He looked up. She was looking at the bookshelf behind him, not at him, at the books, at the row of them the way a person looks at something they want and are not going to say so. "Thank you," he said. "Of course," she said. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and looked at him. "Will that be all?" "For now," he said. She left. He looked at the 2 paragraphs she had written. Then he looked at the door she had closed quietly behind her. Then he looked at the bookshelves. Then he looked back at the 2 paragraphs. He had a great many questions, and he was not entirely certain which ones were appropriate. He picked up his pen and began the letter to Hartley. The letter from Rome arrived on a Tuesday. It came with the Morning Post, tucked between a bill from a London tailor and a note from the county magistrate about a fence dispute that had been ongoing for 4 months. Owen brought it up with the rest and set it on the corner of the desk as usual, and it would have sat there with the others except that the envelope had a red seal that Callum recognized, and the recognition made him pick it up immediately. He broke the seal. He read the first line. He read the second line. He set the letter down and pressed 2 fingers against his forehead. The letter was in Italian. This would not have been a problem under normal circumstances. Callum read Italian adequately, well enough for correspondence, well enough for travel, well enough for the kind of informal exchange that happened over dinner between men who shared two languages and defaulted to the easier one. But this letter was not informal. This letter was from the office of a senior Italian trade official, and it concerned a matter that the Ashmore estate was involved in at several layers, and the Italian in it was the particular dense, formal, carefully worded Italian of legal documentation, which was its own separate language living inside the language he thought he knew. He read it again. He understood approximately 2/3 of it. He was confident about the first half. He was less confident about the second half, where the sentences grew longer and the references became more specific, and there were two phrases he had never encountered before and could not parse from context alone. And those two phrases were in the section that appeared to be the most important section, which was the section that appeared to contain the actual terms of the thing the official was proposing. Hargreaves was still ill. He had written to London for help with the Portuguese matter and received a reply that was helpful but had taken 4 days. He did not have 4 days for this. He sat back. He thought about the girl on the East Corridor. He thought about the 2 paragraphs she had written. He had sent them to Hartley with his letter, and Hartley had written back to say that they had been extremely useful, and that the phrasing was, if he could say so, cleaner than the analysis usually received from specialist consultants. He thought about the particular way she had said, "I can read Portuguese," not "I think I can," or "I have some Portuguese," but the direct and factual "I can read Portuguese," the way a person names a tool they are certain they possess. He went to find Mrs. Colbert. Mrs. Colbert was in the linen room, which was where she was most Tuesday mornings, conducting the kind of inventory that she appeared to find genuinely calming. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. She did not appear startled. Mrs. Colbert had not appeared startled since sometime in her early 30s, according to Callum's best estimate. "Your Grace," she said. "The new housemaid," he said. "Miss Solis, I need to ask her something." Mrs. Colbert set down the tablecloth she was holding. "She is in the East Library," she said. "I sent her to dust and sort. She has been in there since 8. He thanked her and walked to the East Library. The East Library was a room that had started as an overflow library when the main library had run out of wall space 2 generations ago. It contained books that were not in regular use, older volumes, reference works, the kinds of texts that people meant to read and didn't, and duplicate copies of things that no one had gotten around to removing. It smelled of old paper and the particular dust that old paper collects, and it was lit by 2 tall windows that let in reasonable morning light. Amara was in the East Library. She was standing on the 2nd rung of the rolling ladder that ran along the west wall, reaching up to the 3rd shelf from the top, where she appeared to be pulling books out one at a time, dusting their spines, and putting them back in the same position. On the floor beside the ladder was a cloth, already considerably dusty. There was a stack of books beside the cloth that she had apparently set aside for separate attention. She heard him come in and looked down. "Your Grace," she said, and stepped down from the ladder. "You don't have to stop," he said. "I'm stopping anyway," she said, which was one of those statements that sat just at the edge of a thing without quite crossing it. She stepped to the floor and held the duster at her side with the comfortable lack of self-consciousness of someone who did not find holding a duster in front of a duke particularly remarkable. He held up the letter. "I have a letter from Rome," he said. "It is in Italian. There are 2 phrases in the 3rd and 4th sections that I cannot parse with confidence, and they appear to be central to the document's terms." She held out her hand. He gave her the letter. She read it standing, which she seemed to prefer for reading standing or sitting at a table, never in the soft chair that he noticed she had not moved toward in the study either. She read with the same measured steadiness as before. When she reached the 3rd section, she slowed. When she reached the two phrases he had been unable to parse, she stopped and read them again. Then she continued to the end. She looked up. The first phrase, she said, is per via di esclusiva reciproca. It means by way of mutual exclusivity. It is a legal term specific to Italian commercial contracts. It means that the right being granted cannot be shared, transferred, or subdivided. In practical terms, the official is saying that whatever right Ashmore holds under this proposal, it belongs to Ashmore alone and cannot be assigned to a third party. He was writing, she waited. The second phrase, she said, con salvaguardia del regime doganale vigente, with protection of the existing customs arrangement. This one is more significant. The official is inserting a clause that says any agreement made under this proposal is automatically void if the customs arrangement currently in place between the two governments changes. It is a protection for the Italian side. If trade policy shifts, they can walk away. He stopped writing. She looked at him steadily. That, he said, is the clause they did not explain in the attached summary. No, she said, they did not. Because if I had understood it clearly, I would have asked for it to be removed before any further discussion. That would be my reading, she said. Yes. He looked at the letter again, then he looked at her. You have done this before, he said. Not translated. This, read a document for what it is attempting to accomplish rather than what it appears to say. My father was a merchant diplomat, she said. He negotiated contracts for a living. I translated for him. You learn quickly to look at what a clause does rather than what it says, because the people writing the clauses also know the difference. How old were you, he said, when you started translating for him? 12, she said. He received this without expression, which cost him more effort than he showed. How many languages, he said, and then stopped himself, because it was not the kind of question you asked a housemaid you had hired to clean the East Corridor and had called upon twice in 1 week to untangle diplomatic correspondence, and he was aware that asking it was crossing some line of propriety that he had already walked fairly close to. She answered anyway. 9, she said, currently. He looked at her. Currently, he repeated. I am working on a 10th, she said. Arabic, it is coming along. There was a silence in the East Library. Outside the tall windows, the grounds were gray and still under November cloud. Inside, it smelled of old paper and dust, and the particular quiet of a room where books had been sitting for a long time. Somewhere in the house, a door closed. A clock ticked on the mantelpiece that Amara had not yet gotten around to dusting. 9 languages, he said. Yes, she said. Which ones, he said, and this time he did not stop himself. She told him, Italian, French, German, Arabic partial but functional, Portuguese, Greek, Turkish, Latin, and English. She said them in the same tone she might have used to read a list of things needed from a market, clear, sequential, factual. He sat down in the nearest chair, because he was having the particular experience of needing to recalibrate something that he had set at a certain level, and now needed to reset at a substantially different one, and he found it easier to do this sitting down. Why, he said, and then he said it properly because he was aware it needed a full sentence. Why are you here, in this house, in this position? She looked at him without defensiveness, and without the slightly resentful quality that might have been expected of someone who had just been asked, essentially, to explain why someone of their evident ability was holding a duster in an East Corridor. I needed the work, she said. My father died 2 years ago. The work he had done, the contracts, the negotiations, was attached to his name and his connections, and when he was gone, those connections went with him. I had my skills and no context for using them independently. She paused. Houses like this pay regularly and provide a roof. I have been in 4 such houses in 2 years. 4 houses, he said. This is the best one so far, she said. There was something in the way she said it, very small, very controlled, that might have been, in another person, a kind of dry humor. He looked at the letter in his hand. He looked at the notes he had made. He looked at the woman in front of him, who was holding a duster and had just dissected a piece of Italian diplomatic correspondence with the ease of someone completing a familiar task. "I would like," he said slowly, "to propose something, and I want to be clear that you are entirely free to decline." She said nothing. She waited. "My secretary, Hargreaves, handles the correspondence that requires language skills beyond my own. He will be ill for some time. Even when he is well, his range is limited: French, some German, nothing further. I receive documents in many languages. The estate's interests touch many countries." He set the letter down. "I would like to offer you a different position, temporarily to begin with, not housemaid, something closer to a translation assistant or correspondence reader. You would still be resident in the house. The arrangements would need to be thought through. The pay would be different." She looked at him for a long moment. He waited. "What would the duties be specifically?" she said. He blinked, not because the question was surprising, it was the right question, but because the tone of it was entirely businesslike, the tone of a person evaluating a professional offer rather than being relieved to receive one. He told her. He explained the kind of correspondence that came in, the languages it typically involved, the nature of the analysis required. He told her it would sometimes be urgent. He told her it would require discretion, because some of what came through the study involved matters that were not to be discussed outside of it. He told her that the position was not formally recognized anywhere in the household structure, because there was no existing category for it. So it would carry the title of Household Secretary pro tempore, which was a phrase that meant very little but would satisfy the record-keeping. She asked 3 questions, one about the hours, one about whether she would be expected to produce written analyses or only verbal ones, one about what happened when Hargreaves returned. He answered all 3. She said, "Yes, I'll do it." Not "Yes, Your Grace." Not "Thank you, Your Grace." Simply, "Yes, I'll do it," as if they had arrived at an agreement between 2 parties who had both assessed the terms and found them acceptable. He found this, in a way he did not examine closely, a relief. "Good," he said. He stood. "Mrs. Colbert will need to be informed. I'll speak to her." "She will have questions," Amara said. "I expect so," he said. "She will also be displeased," she said. "She has a particular investment in the East Corridor being properly managed." He looked at her. "Have you been here 3 weeks?" 10 days, she said. "And you know that." "I pay attention," she said. He took the letter from Rome and his notes and walked to the door. He stopped. He turned back. She was standing in the middle of the East Library with the duster still in her hand. Watching him with the calm, clear look he was coming to understand was simply her default expression. It was not an expression that demanded anything. It was not performing any emotion for his benefit. It was simply a person looking at another person and seeing what was there. "The floor in the East Corridor," he said, "near the storage room." She raised her eyebrows very slightly. "You scrubbed it twice," he said. "I noticed both times." A pause. "It was not right the first time," she said. "I know," he said. "I just thought it was worth mentioning." He left. She looked at the duster in her hand. Then she put it on the shelf beside the clock she had not yet dusted. She picked up the stack of books from the floor and began to look at the spines, one by one, reading the titles. Most of them she knew. A few she did not. One, near the bottom, she pulled out and read the first page of, standing in the middle of the East Library in the gray November light. It was in Greek. She read a paragraph. She put it back. She picked up the duster. She dusted the clock. Lady Vivienne Colton arrived on a Thursday with 2 carriages, a lady's maid, her mother, and her mother's opinion of the November weather, which was negative and detailed. She was 26 years old, and she had the kind of beauty that was immediately legible: dark hair, pale skin, a smile that she had perfected over years of social events into something that was both genuine-looking and completely controlled. She wore her composure like a second dress, draped neatly over everything, never slipping. Callum met her at the front steps. "Callum," she said, and offered her hand. "Vivienne," he said, and took it. "You look well." "The roads are terrible," she said pleasantly, which was both a complaint and a social nicety simultaneously, the way she managed most of her statements. Lady Elaine Colton, Vivienne's mother, descended from the second carriage with the practiced ease of a woman who had been descending from carriages for 50 years and had no patience for the process being anything other than efficient. She was elegant in the precise, deliberate way of someone who had once been beautiful and had decided, as the years changed what beauty meant, to pivot into something more durable. She looked at the house. She looked at Callum. She nodded once, which was her version of a greeting. "The East Wing, I hope," she said. "Last time I had the North Guest Room and the fireplace smoked." "The East Wing," Callum confirmed. Mrs. Colbert appeared and took charge of the arrivals with the steady competence that was her primary contribution to the house, and which Callum had, over the years, come to value above almost every other quality in any person. He stepped aside and let her work. The visit was, in the main, what such visits were. Vivienne was pleasant company in the way that people who have grown up in houses like Ashmore Hall are pleasant company. She knew the rhythms of a country estate. She did not require constant entertainment. She could fill a silence with conversation or allow a silence to exist, whichever was called for. She read in the afternoons. She walked in the mornings when the weather allowed. She asked Callum considered questions about the estate and the work he was doing, and she listened to the answers with real attention, which was, he had found, not as common as it should have been. They had known each other for 3 years in the way that people from the same social landscape know each other. At events, through correspondence, through the mutual understanding that the connection between them was likely to become something more formal at some point. His mother had made this understanding explicit in her most recent letters. Vivienne's mother had made it explicit in other ways, primarily through the particular quality of her approval whenever Vivienne and Callum were in the same room together, which was palpable enough to be almost audible. On the third day of the visit, a Spanish merchant arrived. His name was Eduardo Vargas, and he came unannounced in the way that merchants come unannounced when the matter they are arriving about is pressing enough that they have decided the inconvenience of the arrival is less problematic than the delay of waiting for an appointment. He was a broad, direct man with good English and a strong preference for conducting the most important parts of any conversation in Spanish, where he felt more precise. Callum met him in the small receiving room off the main hall. "Mr. Vargas," he said, "this is unexpected." "I apologize," Vargas said, in English first, then immediately shifted. "Pero is urgent. There is a problem with the cork shipment. The arrangement we discussed in September, someone in your solicitor's office has sent a counter-proposal that changes the terms we agreed on, and it is written in a way that is either an error or deliberate, and I need to know which before my partners in Madrid make any decisions." Callum's Spanish was conversational and not much more. He had spent 3 weeks in Madrid in his 20s and had maintained a level of the language sufficient for social situations, but not for contract disputes. He could understand Vargas when Vargas spoke slowly. He could not produce the kind of precise response this situation was going to require. He said carefully, "Would you prefer to continue in English?" Vargas considered. "The document," he said in English. "When we discuss the document, I need to be in Spanish. I miss things in English, fine things." "Of course," Callum said. He excused himself. He found Owen in the hall and spoke to him quietly. 2 minutes later, Owen went to find Amara. She was in the small room adjacent to the study that had become, over the past 2 weeks, informally hers, a spare room that had held old ledgers and that Callum had cleared out enough to provide a working space. She was at the table with 3 letters spread in front of her, making notes. She looked up when Owen appeared. He explained the situation in the same careful, factual way he explained everything. She closed her notebook. She stood up. She said, "All right." They were in the main hall when Vivienne appeared at the top of the stairs. Vivienne had a particular quality of attention. It was one of the things that made her good company. She noticed things. She noticed that Owen was walking with purpose. She noticed the girl beside him, who was not one of the regular housemaids in her appearance or her bearing, though she wore the plain dress. She noticed the direction they were heading. She descended the stairs and met them at the bottom. "Owen," she said pleasantly, "is everything all right?" "Yes, my lady," Owen said. "Mr. Vargas has arrived for his grace." "Ah," she said. She looked at Amara with a smile that was quite good. "And you are?" "Amara Solis," Amara said. "I assist with correspondence." Vivienne looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone very politely receiving a piece of information that does not fit where they expected to put it. "How interesting," she said. Then, to Callum, who had appeared from the receiving room to see what was taking Owen, "Callum, your merchant has arrived. I heard him through the wall." "Yes," Callum said. "I apologize for the disruption. Miss Solis is going to help with the translation." Vivienne's smile remained exactly as it was. It did not change by any visible degree. "Of course," she said pleasantly. She went to find her mother. In the receiving room, Vargas was visibly relieved when Amara sat down across from him and spoke to him in Spanish. Not formal Spanish. She had adapted her register immediately to match his, which was the Spanish of a merchant from the south, practical and fast and direct. Callum watched him relax by visible degrees, the way people relax when they suddenly have the room to say exactly what they mean. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. For most of it, Amara translated simultaneously, hearing Vargas's Spanish, turning it into precise English for Callum, hearing Callum's English and turning it into the specific response Vargas needed. She did this without pausing, without asking either man to slow down, without any of the apologetic halting that happened when translators were working at the edge of their competence. She was not at the edge of her competence. At one point, Vargas produced the counter-proposal from the solicitor's office and read a specific clause aloud in Spanish and said something sharp and brief that made Callum look at Amara. "He says," Amara said, "that this clause either means their firm is trying to change the payment window from 90 days to 60, or that whoever wrote it does not understand how Spanish commercial contracts assign payment liability. He wants to know which." Callum looked at the document. "Ask him which reading he considers more damaging." She asked. Vargas answered at some length. She listened. "He says both readings are damaging," she translated. "But the first is intentional damage and the second is accidental damage, and he would rather deal with the second, because at least it comes from incompetence and not dishonesty." Callum looked at Vargas. Vargas looked back with the frank, assessing look of a businessman who had decided the meeting was going better than he had expected. "Tell him," Callum said, "it was incompetence. I'll have it corrected within the week and send the revised document directly." She told him. Vargas nodded. He said something in Spanish. He looked at Amara when he said it and then at Callum. "He wants to know," she said, with a slight pause that Callum was coming to recognize as the pause she made before translating something that was, by the standards of the room, unexpected. "If you always conduct your business this way." "Which way?" Callum said. She said something to Vargas. Vargas said something back and gestured. "He means," she said, "through someone who actually understands both sides." There was a brief silence. "Tell him I am trying to learn," Callum said. She translated this. Vargas laughed, a real laugh, not a social one, and stood up and extended his hand to Callum and they shook it. He said something else to Amara as he was leaving that he said quietly, in Spanish. After Vargas had been shown out by Owen, Callum looked at her. What did he say at the end? She looked at the window for half a second. He said to keep you. Callum was quiet. In a professional sense, she said, and then added nothing further, because she was a person who added things only when they were necessary. He went to find Vivienne. She was in the sitting room with her mother, and a pot of tea that had arrived with the kind of precision that suggested Mrs. Colbert had anticipated the end of the meeting. Lady Elaine looked up when Callum entered with the polite readiness of a woman who had spent a great many years being poised in sitting rooms. Resolved, Vivienne said. Yes, he said. He sat down. He accepted the tea that Vivienne poured him. The girl, Lady Elaine said, in the tone she used when she was commenting on something she had decided to comment on. The translation girl. She is not a housemaid. She was, Callum said. She has a different role now. And what role is that? Lady Elaine asked pleasantly. She manages correspondence that requires language skills, he said. Lady Elaine received this. She set her teacup down with great care. In my day, she said, one hired a professional interpreter for such things. Yes, Callum said. And when no professional interpreter is available and a merchant from Madrid is standing in your receiving room, one uses what one has. Lady Elaine looked at him. He looked back. This was a kind of communication they had been having for 3 years, which was to say he acknowledged her point and declined to be moved by it, and she acknowledged his resistance and declined to be satisfied by it, and they both proceeded having registered the other's position. Vivienne said nothing during this exchange. She sipped her tea and looked at the fireplace. At dinner that evening, the 4 of them, Callum, Vivienne, Lady Elaine, and a neighbor, Mr. Alderton, who had been invited before the Coltons' arrival, sat at the long dining table in the main room and talked about the ordinary things that people in houses like this talked about at dinner. The weather, some recent news from London, the condition of the county roads, a book that Alderton had recently read. Vivienne was at her best at dinners. She had the gift of making each person at the table feel that the conversation was directed at them personally, and she moved between subjects with a kind of easy grace that Callum had always found genuinely impressive. He watched her across the table. He thought about what it would mean to marry her, not in the abstract way he had been thinking about it for the past several months, but more specifically, more practically, what the actual days would look like, what the actual conversations would be. He thought she would be a good partner in the public sense. She was intelligent, she was composed, she understood the life. He thought she would manage the house well and the social obligations better than well. He thought she would be kind to people who worked for him. He had noticed this. She was kind to Owen. She was courteous to Mrs. Colbert. She had not said anything cutting about anyone in the household. He thought about the girl in the receiving room earlier, turning seamlessly between 2 men and 2 languages, as if the air between them were simply a different medium she was trained to move through. He thought, these are 2 entirely different thoughts, and I should not be combining them. He turned his attention back to Alderton, who was describing the book, which was a history of a trade route that Callum had actually read and could discuss with some authority. Later, when the house had settled into its nighttime quiet and Vivienne and her mother had retired, Callum walked through the lower corridor on his way to the study. The light under the door of the small room adjacent to the study was still on. He stopped. He almost knocked. He did not knock. It was past 10. It was her time. He walked on. He sat at his desk and looked at the letter from Fletcher in Paris, which still needed answering, and the revisions he needed to send to Hartley for the Portuguese matter, and the Italian agreement that was still in progress. He looked at the stack of correspondence that had accumulated over the 2 weeks since Amara had taken on the adjacent room. It was notably more organized than it had been. Documents were grouped by language and then by urgency. Analyses were clipped neatly to their source letters. 3 problems that had been sitting unresolved since before Hargreaves had taken ill were now resolved. because they had simply required someone who could read the relevant documents clearly and say what they said. He thought about what it had cost. He thought about what it would cost to have this on a permanent basis, in a proper form, from a person who was actually suited to it. He thought about his mother's most recent letter, sitting unanswered at the edge of his desk, which asked again about Lady Vivienne Colton. He picked up his pen. He put it down. He picked up the letter from Fletcher and read it through to the end. He would deal with one thing at a time. That was generally how he operated, one thing at a time, in the order they needed to be dealt with. He just was not entirely certain tonight what order that was. He asked her directly on a Friday. He had not planned to. He had planned, in the vague way of a person who intends to have a conversation at some unspecified future point, to raise the subject naturally as it arose in context. But by Friday it had not arisen naturally, and he had begun to suspect it was not going to, because she was not the kind of person who offered personal information unless it was extracted by a specific question, and a specific question was what he was going to have to ask. She was in the corridor outside the small adjacent room when he found her, carrying a bundle of papers from the study that needed to be organized back into the filing system Hargreaves had developed, and that she had spent several hours learning so she could maintain it in his absence. She was moving with the quick, efficient economy that was characteristic of all her physical movement. No wasted motion, no dawdling, no performing of busyness. She saw him coming and stopped. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Solis," he said, "walk with me a moment." She looked at the papers in her hands. "Should I put these down first?" "Bring them," he said. They walked. He had not specified where, so they walked in the direction they were both already facing, which took them toward the east corridor and then, by the turn at the end of it, to the lower hall. The house was quiet. It was mid-morning. Mrs. Colbert was in the linen room. Owen was in the front of the house. Vivienne and her mother were, he believed, in the main sitting room, though the Coltons tended to move around the house somewhat unpredictably. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and you should know that you are not required to answer." She said nothing to this, which he had come to understand was her way of indicating that she was listening. "I know your father was a diplomat," he said. "You've mentioned that. I know you translated for him. I know you speak 9 languages, and I know you've been in 4 houses in 2 years. He paused. "What I don't know is the rest." She looked straight ahead as they walked. "The rest is a fairly ordinary story," she said. "Tell me anyway." A brief silence, in which he could not quite tell if she was deciding what to say or deciding how much of it to say. "My father, Edward Solis, worked as a trade diplomat for 30 years, she said, "primarily in Southern Europe and North Africa. My mother died when I was 8. After that, he took me with him wherever he was posted. It was not a typical upbringing." She said this without complaint and without the particular brightness that people sometimes add when they are compensating for the hardship of something by performing gratitude for its educational value. She said it as a fact. "Where did you live?" he said. "Lisbon, Athens, Istanbul for 2 years, Rome for 1, Cairo for 1, which was where the Arabic started. We were in Paris twice briefly, Marseille," she paused, "London at the end. He came back to London when his health began to deteriorate. He wanted to be in England." "When did he die?" 2 years ago," she said, "in January." "And there was no," he began. "No position waiting," she said. "No family with connections that extended to me. No establishment for me to move into." She held the papers steadily as she walked. "He had colleagues who respected him very much. None of them had an obvious use for me once he was gone. I was the diplomat's daughter who could translate, and the diplomat was no longer there to legitimize the translation." He thought about this. He had been thinking about it since the East Library, if he was honest with himself, but he had not had all the pieces until now. "You said 4 houses," he said, "in 2 years. This is the 4th. And the others?" The first was in London, she said. A family with 4 children and extensive correspondence with the continent. I was hired as a governess nominally, but the actual work was translating the letters and occasionally the conversations when foreign guests arrived. I left after 8 months. She did not say why she left, and he did not ask. The second was a house in Hampshire, similar arrangement. The third was near Bath. The households are not difficult. The difficulty is always in the position. What difficulty? He said. She stopped walking. She looked at him with the direct, unhesitating look she used when she was about to say something she had considered and was not uncertain about. There is no proper category for what I do, she said. In every house, I occupy a space that does not have a name. I am not a governess. I am not a companion. I am not a secretary because secretaries are men. I am not a translator in the formal sense because formal translators are independent and I am resident. So I am called something else, household assistant, correspondence reader, whatever is convenient, and that creates 2 problems. The first problem is that people who do not understand the role are confused by it, and confusion turns into suspicion. The second problem is that people who understand it very well understand that it is a useful role without formal standing, and that is the more uncomfortable position to be in. She said all of this without heat and without self-pity, in the flat, honest tone of someone describing a system they have mapped thoroughly and made their peace with. Then she started walking again. He walked beside her. The fourth problem, he said. She had said 2. He said 4 deliberately to see what she would do. She glanced at him sideways. I said 2. I know, he said. What are the other 2? She was quiet for a moment. They turned the corner at the end of the lower hall. The third problem, she said, is that eventually someone in every household decides the arrangement is inappropriate, for reasons that are always differently phrased but are usually the same reason. He did not ask her to explain that further. He understood it. And the fourth, she said, and now she was looking straight ahead again, is that I am very aware in every house of the books in the library that I am not supposed to sit down and read, and this creates an ongoing low-level frustration that I have not successfully resolved. He stopped walking. She went 2 steps past him and then stopped. He said, "You have not read the library here." "I have dusted it," she said, 3 times. "You may read it," he said. "The main library and the East Library, both." She turned and looked at him. For once, something in her face shifted by more than the usual small degree. It was not a large shift, but it was a genuine one, surprise, and then, immediately after, the particular happiness of someone who has been given access to a thing they actually want and has not yet learned to moderate the wanting. "Thank you," she said, and for once the thank you carried weight. "You should have been told that from the beginning," he said. "Housemaids don't read the library," she said, and there was, in this sentence, the edge of something dry that was the closest she came to speaking directly about what was absurd. "No," he said, "they don't." They stood in the corridor for a moment. "The 9 languages," he said, "tell me how." She shifted the papers to her other arm. "Italian because it was the first country after my mother died and my father spoke it already, and it was easier to learn the new language than to find a way to be alone. French because we were in Paris the following spring and French is how a child makes friends when she does not know anyone. German because there was a German family in Lisbon who had children my age, and they were the closest I had to a stable friendship for several years, and I wanted to understand everything they said to each other. Arabic because Cairo was genuinely difficult at first, and learning the language was the only way through. Greek because Istanbul led to Greece and I had already started and it seemed wrong to stop. Turkish because..." She paused. "Why Turkish?" he said. "Because it is a beautiful language," she said simply. "No other reason, I just wanted to." He said nothing for a moment. "Latin because my father believed I should and he was right. Portuguese because of Lisbon, though it came later than it should have. English..." She stopped. English is my first language, technically. It is also in some ways the one I use most carefully. Why, he said. Because it is the one people expect me to perform in, she said. When I speak French or Italian or Turkish, people are simply glad I can. When I speak English, they are listening for whether I speak it correctly. There is a different weight to it. He thought about this for quite a long time, standing in the lower corridor of his house on a Friday morning with papers in the air and the sound of the house around him. "Miss Solis," he said. "Your Grace," she said. "I want to make your position formal," he said. "Not pro tempore, permanent, with a proper title and a proper wage and a room that is not at the end of the east corridor with no rug and a north-facing window." She looked at him. "Hargreaves will return," she said, "eventually." "Yes," he said, "and he will handle the English correspondence, which is the majority of it and which he handles very well, and you will handle the rest, which is a not inconsiderable portion and which he handles inadequately or not at all. These are two different functions. There is room for both." She was quiet. She did that when she was thinking. She simply went quiet without filling the space with anything. He had noticed she never made sound to indicate thinking. No no well, no considering pause. She just thought. "All right," she said. "All right, you accept," he said. "All right, I accept," she said. He nodded. He looked at the papers she was carrying. "What are those?" "The Greek shipping matter," she said. "I found a discrepancy in the original contract that I think needs to be brought to Mr. Hartley's attention. The agreed delivery terms in the English text and the Greek text use different calendar systems. It is a small difference, but over a 12-month contract it produces a 7-day gap that could be commercially significant." He looked at her. "In the East Corridor," she said, "the work is done by noon. There is time." He took one of the papers from the bundle. He looked at it. "Walk me through it," he said. She walked him through it. They stood in the lower corridor for 20 minutes while she explained, clearly and without condescension, the 7-day discrepancy, its origins, its possible consequences, and what she thought should be done about it. He asked questions. She answered them. He disagreed with her on one point, the urgency, and she disagreed back, citing a specific clause that she had apparently memorized. He looked at the clause. She was right. "Fine," he said. "Write it up. I'll send it to Hartley today." She nodded and turned to go. "Miss Solis," he said. She turned. "There is a rug in the storage room on the East Corridor," he said. "Third shelf from the bottom. Mrs. Colbert never moved it because the room it was meant for is closed. Take it." A pause. "The room I'm moving out of," she said. "Bring it with you to the new room," he said, "wherever Mrs. Colbert puts you." But she looked at him for a moment with the expression she used when something had landed that she had not expected. Then she said, "Thank you," and walked back toward the study. He stood in the corridor alone. He thought about the 11 things currently requiring his attention. He thought about the letter from his mother. He thought about Vivienne in the sitting room with her tea. He thought about 7-day gaps in Greek shipping contracts. He thought about a 12-year-old girl in Lisbon learning Italian, because it was easier than being alone. He went to write to Hartley. The Dowager Duchess, Callum's mother, did not live in the main house, but she conducted her life as if the boundary between the Dower House and Ashmore Hall were a matter of administrative convenience rather than anything real. Her name was Frances Ashmore, and she had held the title of Duchess for 30 years and the title of Dowager for 4, and she wore both with the ease of someone who had never actually needed a title to feel entitled. She was 62, sharp in the way that certain kinds of intelligence are sharp, the kind that had spent decades being used practically rather than decoratively, and she held opinions the way other people held property, with conviction and without the intention of giving them up without a fight. She arrived at the main house on a Saturday morning, which was her custom. She arrived before anyone expected her, which was also her custom. She walked through the front door with her coat still on and found Callum in the main hall in a conversation with Amara about a letter from Istanbul, which was not what she had expected to find him doing. She stopped. Callum looked up. "Good morning, Mother." Francis looked at him, then at the girl beside him, then at the papers they were both holding. "Good morning," she said. She did not take her coat off. She continued looking at the girl. "Miss Amara Solis," Callum said. "She manages the foreign correspondence for the estate. My mother, the Dowager Duchess." Amara said, "Good morning, Your Grace," with the same level, courteous tone she used for everyone, which was to say without either servility or defiance, the tone of someone who had decided that courtesy was a neutral and useful instrument and applied it accordingly. Francis looked at her for a moment that went a beat past comfortable. Then she said, "The Istanbul letter, is it the shipping matter or the trade agreement?" Amara said, "The trade agreement. There is a proposal attached that has not been included in the English summary that was sent separately." Francis looked at Callum. The summary was incomplete. "Apparently," he said. Francis said, "Who wrote the summary?" "The office in London," Callum said. Francis said something that was not quite a word, but communicated a comprehensive negative opinion of the office in London. Then she said, "Show me." She sat down in the chair at the hall table. Amara set the relevant papers in front of her and indicated the section of the Turkish letter that contained the unsummarized proposal, then set the English summary beside it. Francis put on her reading glasses and read both. Her reading glasses had gold frames that she had owned for 20 years and had no intention of replacing. She read with the same focused efficiency that Callum had inherited or learned or both. She looked up. "What does the additional clause say?" she asked, looking at Amara. "It proposes a change to the arbitration terms," Amara said. "Currently, any dispute under the agreement defaults to English arbitration. The new clause suggests moving to a neutral third-party arbitration in this case, a Swiss body. The wording is diplomatic, but the effect would be to remove the existing advantage to the English party in any dispute." "And you believe," Francis said, "that this was omitted from the English summary intentionally or by oversight?" "I don't know," Amara said, "but the clause is on the second page of the Turkish letter, written clearly and in standard commercial language. It is not a buried phrase or an obscure provision. Whoever summarized the letter either did not read the second page or chose not to include it." Francis took her glasses off. She looked at Callum. "She is the girl on the East Corridor," Francis said. "She was," he said. "She is now the correspondence manager for the estate's international affairs." Francis put her glasses back on. She looked at Amara again. "How long have you been at Ashmore Hall?" "5 weeks, Your Grace," Amara said. "And in 5 weeks you have identified a gap in the Portuguese shipping matter, a discrepancy in the Greek calendar terms, and now an omission in the Istanbul summary." "Yes, Your Grace." Francis looked at the papers again. Then she said to Callum, "Did you give her the main library?" "Yes," he said. "Good," Francis said. She stood up and finally took her coat off, which she handed to a footman who appeared at exactly the right moment, because the footmen at Ashmore Hall had been trained to appear at exactly the right moment. "Bring me tea," she said to no one and everyone. "I'll be in the morning room." She walked away. At the door to the morning room she stopped and looked back at Amara. "The Istanbul arbitration clause, write up the implications. 2 pages, no more. I want to read it before Callum sends his response." "Yes, Your Grace," Amara said. Francis went into the morning room. The door did not quite close behind her. Callum looked at Amara. "Well," he said. "She is very direct," Amara said. "Yes," he said, "she is." "It is efficient," she said, and turned back to the papers. Vivienne had watched the exchange from the upper landing, where she had been about to descend for breakfast. She had not meant to watch. She had simply been there when the scene below arranged itself, and watching had been unavoidable. She watched the girl, Amara, set the papers in front of the dowager with the ease of someone who was accustomed to setting things in front of people who commanded rooms. She watched the dowager, who was notoriously difficult in first encounters, direct a question at the girl without the social warm-up she usually required from new acquaintances. She watched the girl answer without hesitation. She watched her brother-in-law to be standing beside a housemaid in the main hall, discussing Turkish arbitration clauses at 9 in the morning, looking, she noticed, more engaged than she had seen him look at any point during the previous week. She went down to breakfast. Her mother was already at the table, spreading marmalade on toast with the focused attention she applied to most tasks, large and small. "Good morning, Vivienne," Lady Elaine said. "Good morning, Mama," Vivienne said. She sat down, she poured herself tea. Lady Elaine looked at her. "You look thoughtful." "I am always thoughtful at breakfast," Vivienne said. "More thoughtful than usual," Lady Elaine said. Vivienne said nothing. She drank her tea. At 11, Callum came to find her. He suggested a walk because the morning had turned out well and he wanted to make use of it, and because he had learned that Vivienne thought more clearly when she was moving than when she was sitting. They walked the south path that ran along the edge of the grounds, between the kitchen garden and the old orchard. "My mother liked her," Vivienne said. Callum looked at her. "My mother asks everyone the same 4 questions," he said. "She asked the girl none of them. She asked about the letter." "Your mother asked about the letter because the girl was more interesting on the subject of the letter than most people are in response to the 4 questions," Vivienne said. "That is not a neutral observation. That is an endorsement." He was quiet for a moment. They walked. "You could have told me," Vivienne said, "that she was not the housemaid anymore. You could have mentioned it." "I was not keeping it from you," he said. "The change was recent. It has been a busy several weeks." "It has," she agreed. She stopped and looked at the kitchen garden, which was still mostly bare. November had done its work on it. "She is quite remarkable." "She is very capable," he said carefully. Vivienne looked at him. Callum Ashmore was a man who chose his words precisely, who said very capable, the way other men might say extraordinary, who understated as a habit rather than a choice. She had known this for 3 years. She had always found it one of his more interesting qualities. It was interesting to her now in a way that was not entirely comfortable. "Callum," she said. "Vivienne," he said. "I am not going to ask you something that I think would make both of us uncomfortable," she said. "I am going to say instead that I think she is quite remarkable, and that you clearly think so as well. And that there is a significant difference between that and whatever you and I are currently in the process of arranging." He looked at her. She looked back at him with the clear, composed expression that she maintained in all circumstances. But there was something beneath it that was more honest than the expression, something that asked a question it was not going to name. "What she does," he said, "is professionally valuable. What he stopped. He started again. What we have is different." "Is it?" she said. The question was not accusatory. It was genuinely asked, with the directness of a person who had decided that a comfortable lie was less useful than an uncomfortable truth. He did not answer immediately. This was itself an answer of a kind. Vivienne began walking again. He fell into step beside her. "I think," she said, "that I am going to need you to be certain, not for my pride, for both our sakes, because I am not interested in an arrangement that is made for the right social reasons at the wrong personal time, and I do not think you are either. You are not that kind of person." "No," he said. "Then be certain," she said. "Take the time that is necessary and be certain." They walked the rest of the path in silence that was not hostile and was not entirely comfortable. It was the silence of 2 intelligent people who had said what needed to be said and were letting it settle. At the far end of the path, They turned back toward the house. "She speaks 9 languages," he said, not because it was the most important thing, but because it was the fact he kept returning to. "I know," Vivienne said. "She told me the day I arrived when I asked her what she did for the household." He stopped walking. "She told you?" "I asked directly," Vivienne said. "She answered directly. She said she managed the foreign correspondence and that she spoke 9 languages, and then she asked if there was anything she could do for me." A pause. "I said no, I was being foolish." He looked at her. "I am being foolish now as well," she said, "but at least I know it." They walked back to the house together. Inside, the morning room door was open and Frances could be heard talking to Owen about the tea, which had apparently not been hot enough. In the small room off the study, through the closed door, there was the quiet sound of someone writing, the particular sound of a pen moving steadily across paper, unhurried, purposeful. Vivienne heard it too. She did not say anything about it. She went upstairs. That evening, Frances held the 2-page analysis of the Istanbul arbitration clause in her hands and read it at the dinner table while the soup was served, which was not table etiquette, and which she had not observed table etiquette about since her husband had died, and she had decided that the dining table was, in her remaining years, a place for things she actually wanted to do. She read it twice. "Concise," she said. "Accurate. The recommendation is exactly right." She set it down. She looked at Callum. "Whatever you are paying her, it is not enough." "I have not formally set the wage yet," he said. "Then do it tomorrow," Frances said. "And do it generously. The kind of thing she has found in these documents in 5 weeks is the kind of thing we have been paying London firms to not find for years." Callum said he would. Frances picked up her soup spoon. "She reminds me," she said, in the tone she used when she was about to say something she had thought about carefully, "of the woman who tutored you in French when you were 9. Do you remember her?" "Madame Leconte," he said, vaguely. "She was a diplomat's daughter too," Frances said. "She had been everywhere. She knew 12 languages. She ended up in our drawing room teaching a 9-year-old declensions because there was no other category for her and she needed the income." Frances set her spoon down. "I have always thought that was a terrible waste. I should have found her something better." She picked up the spoon again. No one at the table said anything for a moment. Then Callum said, "You could not have known." "No," Frances said, "but I could have asked." She looked at her soup. "One can always ask." The work was not romantic. Amara thought about this sometimes, in the way that a person thinks about things that are true and should be said plainly even if only to themselves. The work was interesting. The work was engaging in the particular way that problems are engaging when they are genuinely difficult and you are genuinely capable of solving them. But it was not romantic. It was papers and ink on her fingers, and sometimes ink on the cuff. She had not moved out of the way fast enough. It was early mornings and late nights, and the low-grade satisfaction of a thing done correctly, which was not excitement but was better than excitement, because it lasted. She had been at Ashmore Hall for 2 months now. The new room was warmer than the East Corridor. It was on the 2nd floor of the East Wing, not far from where the family apartments were, which was an uncomfortable proximity in one sense and a practical one in another, because the study was near, and the study was where most of the relevant materials lived. The room had a proper window and a rug that was not the rug from the storage room. Mrs. Colbert had found that one and taken it for some other purpose before Amara could retrieve it, and had installed a better one without comment. Amara had taken this as either generosity or a statement, and had decided it was probably both. Hargreaves had returned. He was a narrow, careful man in his late 40s who wore his intelligence quietly and did not waste words. He had returned from his illness with the slightly translucent look of a person who had been genuinely unwell, and had recovered to find the world continuing without much disruption. He had looked at the correspondence files, which were now organized in a system that was partly his and partly Amara's, and he had said very little about this, except to ask who had done the Greek filing, which was different from his system. Miss Solis, Owen had told him. Hargreaves had looked at the Greek filing for a moment. Then he had reorganized one section of it and left the rest as it was, which was how Amara had known, without being told, that they were going to be all right. They had an efficient arrangement. He handled English. She handled everything else. When a letter arrived in French or German or any of the other 7, it came to her. When a letter arrived in English and happened to be about a matter she was already familiar with, he would sometimes knock at her door and ask her to look at something, and she would, and they would discuss it briefly and professionally, and he would go back to his room and do whatever he did next. He never asked about her background. She did not volunteer it. This was also a kind of working arrangement, and it suited them both. What Amara had not expected, what she had not, if she was honest, fully anticipated, was how interesting the work turned out to be. She had translated before, many times in many contexts. She had turned words from one language into words in another language for her father's meetings, for his contracts, for his letters. She had done it competently and quickly, and with the particular skill of someone who has been doing a thing since childhood and has long since stopped thinking of it as a skill. But she had always done it as a service to her father's understanding. He had been the person making the decisions, and she had given him the information to make them. Here she was making assessments, not decisions, those remained Callum's, but assessments that informed the decisions, which was a different thing than translation, and a thing she found she was good at in a way that was slightly different from the way she had been good at translation. Translation was precision. Assessment was judgment. Judgment required understanding, not just what the words said, but what the person writing them knew and wanted and feared. And that was a kind of reading that she had been doing all her life without quite knowing it had a professional application. She thought about this on a Tuesday evening in December, sitting at her table with the lamp on and the window dark, and a letter from a trade association in Hamburg that was, on its surface, about wool tariffs and was, on closer reading, about something else entirely. She read it 3 times. She wrote a note to herself about the 3rd reading. She set it aside to come back to. She picked up the book she had been reading. It was from the main library. It was in French, a history of trade routes in the Mediterranean in the previous century, very long, slightly dry, and exactly what she had wanted to read for 2 years. She read for an hour. She put it down. She went back to the Hamburg letter. It was on the 3rd reading that the pattern became clear to her. The association was not writing about tariffs. They were writing about a negotiation that was currently happening at a government level, one that the estate's trading interests touched at several points, and they were writing about it in the particular oblique way of people who are not free to say what they mean, but are hoping that someone on the receiving end is smart enough to hear it anyway. She wrote a second, longer note. She went to bed. In the morning, she put the notes and the Hamburg letter on the corner of her table and thought about whether to bring it to Callum directly or to put it in the filing system for his review. She put it in the filing system. Then she took it out. Then she looked at it for a moment and thought about the number that was going to be on the wrong side of a ledger if the negotiation being obliquely referenced went in a particular direction. She went to the study. He was at his desk. He was reading a letter and making notes at the margin with the small, precise handwriting he used for notes, which was different from his regular handwriting in the way that working handwriting is different, faster, abbreviated, taking up less space on the page. He looked up. "The Hamburg letter," she said. He looked at the file in her hand. "I saw it came in yesterday. What does it say?" She sat down in the chair across from his desk, which she had by this point been using long enough that it had become understood to be her chair, in the same way that the small adjacent room had become understood to be her room. She explained the Hamburg letter. She explained the surface reading and the deeper reading, and what she thought the deeper reading meant for the estate's position. He listened the way he always listened, which was completely. He had a quality of attention that she had noticed in the first weeks and had come to rely on. When he was listening, he was entirely listening, not preparing his response while she was still speaking, not letting his eyes drift. He absorbed what she said, and then he thought about it, and then he said something that showed he had heard all of it, not just the easily digestible portions. "If you're right about the reading," he said, "we have 6 weeks before the negotiation reaches the stage where it becomes commercially relevant." "About 6 weeks," she said, "possibly 8. The letter is dated 2 weeks ago." "So 4 to 6 weeks," he said. "Yes." He picked up a pen. He looked at the Hamburg letter. "Who is the best contact for direct information about the negotiation?" "Fletcher in Paris knows the French position," she said. "The German position, the honest German position, I don't know your network well enough to say." "I have a contact in Frankfurt," he said. "Georg Mueller. He is reliable, but he takes his time responding." "Is there a German letter in the correspondence I haven't seen?" she said. "Something from the past month he may have already written." Callum looked at Hargreaves's filing system. He looked at Amara. She went to the filing system. It took her 4 minutes, which told her exactly how well she knew it. She found a letter from Frankfurt, dated 3 weeks ago, that was in the General Trade Correspondence file under a label that Hargreaves had assigned before he understood its potential relevance. She brought it back and set it on the desk. He looked at the envelope. "I read this," he said. "I thought it was a social letter." "The first 2 paragraphs are," she said. "The 3rd paragraph is not." He opened it and read the 3rd paragraph. He set the letter down. "He's already flagging the negotiation," he said. "Yes," she said. A pause. "How did you know there was a letter?" he said. "I didn't," she said. "But you have a contact in Frankfurt and the matter we are discussing touches Frankfurt interests, and it has been 3 weeks. It seemed likely." He looked at her. She looked back. "Write to Fletcher," he said. "Today, draft something I can sign. Tell him we have reason to believe the German position is more fluid than the official position and ask what he knows." He picked up his pen. "And write to Mueller. I'll sign that one too. He needs to know we received his signal." She made a note. "What is Mueller's formality preference?" she said. "Does he want official language or does he respond better to direct?" Callum looked at her. "He responds better to direct," he said. "He is a very impatient man." "Then I'll write it directly," she said. She wrote both letters that morning. She pushed them across the desk for his review. He read them and signed them. He handed them back without changing anything in either, which was not something she took for granted. The first time he had handed something back without changes she had waited, assuming there was something more, and he had said, "No, that's right," with the slight surprise of a man who was not entirely accustomed to things being right. 2 months in, he still read everything she wrote, but he had stopped looking surprised. In the afternoons, when the correspondence was sorted and the urgent things were handled, she had begun, quietly, to build a secondary reference system for the estate's international affairs. A set of notes organized by country, by contact, by current matter, cross-referenced to the relevant correspondence files. She had not been asked to do this. She had done it because it did not exist, and she needed it to exist in order to work efficiently. And because the absence of it was the reason, she suspected, that things had been missed and letters had been misfiled, and oblique signals from Frankfurt had been categorized as social mail. She showed it to Callum in the 3rd week of December. He looked at it for a long time. "Hargreaves doesn't have one of these," he said. "No," she said. "Could he use it?" "He could," she said. "Once it is complete, he is welcome to consult it. I would need to keep maintaining it." He looked up. "You assumed you would be maintaining it." "Yes," she said. "Permanently," he said. "Unless you prefer someone else to," she said. "I wouldn't," he said. She nodded. She started to stand. Amara, he said. She stopped. It was the first time he had used her given name, and it arrived with the slight unexpectedness of a sound at the wrong moment, not unpleasant, just not where she had placed it in the architecture of the room. She was not certain whether he knew he had done it or whether it had happened as a natural consequence of whatever he had been about to say, which had brought her name along with it. He appeared to know he had done it. He did not correct it. He said, "The reference system, it is exceptional work." "Thank you," she said. "I mean it," he said, "not as a courtesy." "I know," she said. "I can usually tell the difference." He looked at her. Something in his expression was difficult to read, which was unusual because he was generally a readable person if you knew what to look for, and she had been looking for it for 2 months. She picked up her notes. "Good night, Your Grace," she said. "Good night," he said. She walked back to her room. She sat at her table. The lamp was on and the window was dark with December, and the house was settling into its evening sounds around her. She thought, "This will do for a long time." She thought, "That is a different thing from what I said in October." She opened the French history book. She read for an hour. She closed it. She thought about him saying her name, and the way it had sounded in the study in the evening quiet. She put out the lamp. The dinner was Vivienne's idea. Or rather, the dinner was Lady Elaine's idea, stated firmly enough that it became everyone's idea. 18 guests, a Saturday in December, the kind of event that Ashmore Hall hosted twice a year, and which required 3 weeks of preparation, and the temporary reinstatement of all the formal procedures that Callum quietly let lapse when there was no one there to insist on them. Mrs. Colbert was in her element. The kitchen was transformed. The silver was brought out. The dining room, which Callum used perhaps once a month on ordinary evenings, was made into what it had been designed to be, long and bright, with candles at both ends and the good china and 8 feet of table that forced a kind of formality onto conversation simply by existing. Amara was not invited to the dinner. This was appropriate, and she knew it was appropriate, and she did not spend any particular time thinking about whether it was appropriate. She was not a guest. She was staff, elevated staff, staff with a different title and a different room, but still resident in a house that had a clear structure and a clear distinction between the people who sat at the table and the people who moved around the edges of the room. She spent the afternoon in the study completing a response to Georg Müller in Frankfurt, who had written back with more information than she had expected about the ongoing German position in the trade negotiation. It was a useful letter. She noted the relevant points, organized them against the reference system, and drafted Callum's reply with the directness that Müller preferred. She left it on his desk with a note on top. She ate her supper early in the kitchen, which Clara had made comfortable, and which smelled of the extraordinary food being prepared for the dining room above. Clara was not in the business of feeling sorry for people who were not at the main table. She had fed the entire estate for 20 years, and had decided that this was its own form of dignity, which Amara had come to agree with. "Roast tonight," Amara said. "2 of them," Clara said, "and the lamb and 4 sauces, and a pudding that I am not confident about." "The pudding will be fine," Nell said from the other end of the table. "You say that every time," Clara said. "And every time it is," Nell said. Amara ate her supper and listened to the kitchen's ordinary noise and went back upstairs. She read until 9. At 9:15 she heard the dinner party above her, the low hum of voices that large rooms collect and hold, the occasional louder note of a laugh, the sound of cutlery against china. She was aware of it the way you are.